I have never shared this with anyone before. It's a secret I've carried deep within me for years, tormenting me every night before I fall asleep. But I can't bear it any longer. I need to unburden myself, even if only by confessing to a stranger. It all started 5 years ago. I was 35, a philosophy professor at the prestigious St. Augustine Institute, with a promising career ahead of me. I loved my job, shaping young minds, guiding them in their pursuit of truth and knowledge. I was married to my work, or so I thought. On the first day of the new school year, as I went through the roll call, one name caught my attention: Roger Nolan. I looked up, and our eyes met. There was something about him, an intensity that left me momentarily breathless. He was only 18, but his eyes reflected a wisdom far beyond his years. The first few weeks passed uneventfully, but I soon noticed Roger lingering after class, asking questions that went far beyond the curriculum. His curiosity was insatiable, his mind razor-sharp. Our discussions grew deeper and more frequent. One day, as we debated the concept of free will, I felt a connection I had never experienced before, as though our minds were perfectly in tune. It reminded me of my younger self, passionate about philosophy, eager to unravel the universe's mysteries. I knew I was treading dangerous ground, but I couldn't help myself. We began meeting outside the classroom, in cafes, in parks. We talked for hours about Plato, Nietzsche, Sartre, and, increasingly, about ourselves. Roger shared his dreams, fears, and his quest for meaning, and, for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. But there was a problem, a dark secret that threatened to destroy everything. For months, I had been involved in a clandestine affair with the school's headmaster, Mr. Benjamin. He was 15 years older than me, married, and our relationship had begun during an educational conference. What started as a fleeting fling had deepened into something far more complicated. I felt trapped between two worlds. On one side was the intellectual and emotional connection I shared with Roger, a spark that reignited my soul. On the other was the stability and status my relationship with Mr. Benjamin afforded me. I knew what I was doing was wrong on every level, but I couldn't stop myself. And then things became even more complicated. When Roger began to suspect something, his questions became increasingly pointed. He would casually inquire about my personal life, subtly hinting at the time I spent in the director's office. I tried to deflect his suspicions, but he was far too perceptive. The tension between us grew with each passing day. One afternoon, after class, Roger confronted me directly. "What's going on between you and the director, Professor?" he asked, his voice tinged with both hurt and anger. I tried to deny everything, but even to my own ears, my excuses rang hollow. The situation reached a breaking point a week later. I was in the middle of a lecture when Roger stormed into the classroom. Without preamble, he accused me, right there, in front of my students, of being a liar and a traitor. The room fell into a stunned silence, every pair of eyes fixed on me. Then came the bombshell. "Do you know why it hurts so much, Professor?" Roger's voice cracked. "Because Mr. Benjamin isn't just the director. He's my father." In that moment, my world stopped. It felt as though the ground beneath me had collapsed. Everything I had built, my career, my reputation, was crumbling before my eyes. The murmurs of the students filled the room as I stood there, frozen, unable to muster a single word. The fallout was catastrophic. Roger was expelled for his disruptive behavior, despite my attempts to intervene on his behalf. My reputation was left in tatters. Colleagues who once respected me now regarded me with either pity or disdain. Students whispered behind my back. The place I had once called home felt alien, unrecognizable. Mr. Benjamin, shielded by his connections, managed to retain his position as director, but our relationship disintegrated. What had once been fiery and passionate turned into something cold and heavy, laced with resentment and guilt. We avoided each other in the hallways, communicating only through curt, formal emails when absolutely necessary. The months that followed were hell. Each morning, it took every ounce of strength to drag myself out of bed and face another day of accusatory stares and whispered judgments. But I forced myself to endure. I had to believe I was more than my mistakes, that I still had something of value to offer as an educator. Eventually, the school settled into a semblance of normalcy. I heard through the grapevine that Roger had moved to another city to start over. Part of me was glad for him, hoping he could heal and find his path. Another, more selfish part of me ached for his absence. As for Mr. Benjamin and me, we attempted to rebuild what we had, though it was more out of necessity than desire. We were like two castaways clinging to one another amid a storm of scrutiny and condemnation. Our secret meetings became less about intimacy and more about survival, discussing damage control and strategies to weather the judgment surrounding us. Yet the scars of those choices remained, and I often wondered whether any of us could ever truly recover. High school had become a place of survival rather than fulfillment. The romance in my life had long since died, replaced by a fragile truce built on mutual necessity. To cope, I threw myself into my work with a fervor bordering on obsession. I meticulously prepared my lessons, determined to be the best teacher I could be. I began taking on extracurricular activities, leading debate clubs and organizing philosophical reading groups. Slowly, some students began to gravitate toward me again, drawn by my renewed passion for teaching. It was a slow, painful process, but I started to regain fragments of the trust one had lost. A few colleagues, noticing my dedication, softened toward me, offering small gestures of cordiality. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One afternoon, while grading essays in my classroom, an email notification appeared on my screen. Seeing the sender's name made my breath catch, Roger. My hands trembled as I opened the message. Dear Professor Amelia, 6 months have passed since that fateful day. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on what happened. Though the pain still lingers, I think it's time to close this chapter. I'm not seeking your forgiveness, nor am I offering mine. I just want you to know that, despite everything, the conversations we had changed my life. They helped me find my path. I'm studying philosophy at university now. Every time I open a book by Kant or Heidegger, I think of you, the good and the bad, the lessons learned and the mistakes made. I hope you found peace and that you continue to inspire others, as you inspired me, even if only for a brief moment. Goodbye, Professor. May wisdom always guide you. Roger. Tears streamed down my face as I read and reread his words. The message was a complex cocktail of relief, sorrow, and a strange sense of pride. Roger had found his way, and in some measure, whether for better or worse, I had been a part of that journey. That night, sitting on my balcony beneath the stars, I made a decision. It was time to be fully honest, with myself and with others. The following morning, I requested a meeting with the school administration. Standing before my colleagues and superiors, I confessed everything. My relationship with Mr. Benjamin, the mistakes I had made, and the toll it had taken on everyone involved. For the first time, I faced the consequences with an open heart, ready to accept whatever came next. I confessed everything to the board, my inappropriate connection with Roger, my mistakes, my regrets, and my unshakable love for teaching. I shared my desire to atone, not just to redeem my career, but to become a better person. The silence that followed my confession was deafening. I could feel the weight of their gazes, some surprised, others disappointed, and a few surprisingly sympathetic. Finally, the board president broke the silence. Professor Amelia, he began, his tone measured, we appreciate your honesty. What you did was unacceptable and goes against everything we stand for as an educational institution. However, we also believe in redemption and in the power of education to transform lives. We are willing to give you one last chance. You will remain under strict supervision, and any further misconduct will result in your immediate resignation. Are you willing to accept these terms? Without hesitation, I nodded. It was more than I deserved, and I was determined not to squander this opportunity. The months that followed were an unrelenting challenge. Each day was a battle to regain the trust of my colleagues and students. I worked tirelessly to ensure transparency in my actions, always maintaining an unwavering standard of professionalism. I organized seminars on ethics in education, using my own story as a cautionary tale of what not to do. My relationship with Mr. Benjamin came to a natural end. We both acknowledged that our bond had been built on loneliness and a need for validation rather than genuine love. We parted ways amicably, agreeing to maintain a strictly professional relationship moving forward. Gradually, things began to improve. Students responded positively to my revised approach to teaching. My classes buzzed with passionate debates on ethics, morality, and the search for meaning. I used my own experiences to spark discussions about the consequences of our actions and the importance of integrity. 1 year after my confession, I received an unexpected honor. The school announced my appointment as head of the philosophy department. It was a vote of confidence that left me speechless. When I asked the director, Mr. Benjamin's successor, why I had been chosen, his answer was simple yet profound. Because you've shown that failure isn't the end, Professor Amelia. It's what you do afterward that defines you. Those words stayed with me. They reminded me that redemption is not about erasing the past but about proving that you've learned from it. When I asked why I had been chosen for the position, the director's response took me by surprise. Amelia, he said, you've demonstrated something many of us often forget. Philosophy is not just theory but a way of life. You faced your mistakes with courage and turned your experiences into valuable lessons about ethics and responsibility. That is what we need in a department leader. His words gave me the strength to move forward. I poured my heart into my new role, determined to honor the trust that had been placed in me. 2 years later, while preparing the curriculum for the upcoming school year, I received another surprise, an invitation to speak at a national education conference. The topic? Ethics in Education, Learning from Our Mistakes. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of educators from across the country, I felt a lump in my throat. I took a deep breath and began. 3 years ago, I made the greatest mistake of my life, I admitted. I shared my story, speaking openly about failure, redemption, second chances, and the importance of using even our most painful experiences as tools for growth. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Afterward, many attendees approached me to express their gratitude for my honesty. Some even shared their own ethical struggles, revealing just how universal such challenges can be. That night, back in my hotel room, I reflected on the journey I had taken. I had lost so much: the trust of my colleagues, the respect of my students, and, for a time, my own sense of integrity. But in the process, I had gained something invaluable: a deeper understanding of myself and the fragile nature of human ethics. I thought of Roger, wondering where he was and hoping he had found the peace and purpose he sought. I thought of Mr. Benjamin and the painful lessons we had both learned. My story, with all its twists, mistakes, and moments of redemption, was a testament to the complexity of human experience. None of us are wholly good or bad. We are a blend of light and shadow, constantly striving to make the right choices in a world filled with moral dilemmas. As I gazed out the hotel window at the city lights, I found peace in the idea that each illuminated window contained its own story, some of triumph, some of failure, and most a mix of both. For the first time in years, I felt truly at ease with my place in the vast tapestry of human experience. The next morning, as I packed my belongings, I noticed a note slipped under my door. Curious, I unfolded it, and what I read nearly took my breath away. Dear Professor Amelia, I was in the audience last night. Your lecture yesterday. I couldn't muster the courage to speak with you afterward, but I needed to say this: I forgive you, and I forgive myself. Your former student, Roger. Tears blurred my vision as I reread the note multiple times. It was the closure I didn't know I needed, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is the possibility of redemption and growth. I returned to the school with a new perspective and a renewed purpose. I was no longer the same woman who had made those mistakes years before. I was wiser, more compassionate, and paradoxically, a better educator. In the years that followed, my career flourished in ways I had never imagined. I developed an ethics program for educators that was implemented in several high schools across the region. I wrote a book about my experiences titled Lessons from the Abyss, A Journey of Redemption in Education, which became required reading in many education programs at universities. But the most significant impact was on my students. I used my story as a powerful tool to teach about ethics, responsibility, and the consequences of our actions. I witnessed how my words resonated with them, how I helped them confront their own moral dilemmas and understand the complexities of adult life. One day, while walking down the school corridor, I found a student crying in a corner. I approached her cautiously, aware of the boundaries I had to maintain. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. The girl, Sophia, looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. "Professor Amelia, I did something terrible. I cheated on the math test, and now I feel awful. I don't know what to do." In that moment, I felt a profound connection with Sophia. She was a reflection of my own past mistakes and fears, but I also saw an opportunity to guide her toward a better path. "Sophia," I said, sitting beside her, "making mistakes is part of being human. The important thing is how we respond to them. Let me share a story with you." I shared a shortened version of my own experience, carefully omitting the more painful details. I spoke about the importance of honesty, the strength it takes to admit wrongdoing, and the possibility of learning and growing from our errors. Sophia listened intently, her tears beginning to subside as she absorbed the message. "Thank you, Professor Amelia," she whispered. "I think I understand now." As I left the corridor that day, I felt a sense of fulfillment. Helping Sophia navigate her moral struggle reaffirmed my belief in the power of redemption and the enduring impact of sharing our stories. Each interaction, each lesson taught, was a step toward healing, not just for my students, but for myself as well. My journey had taught me that our past does not define us, but rather, how we choose to move forward does. In guiding others, I had found my own path to peace and purpose, solidifying my role not just as an educator, but as a mentor and a beacon of hope for those grappling with their own ethical dilemmas. A place of resolution, where the past no longer felt like a weight, but rather a foundation for growth. As Roger and I sat across from each other in the small cafe, the conversation flowed with surprising ease. He spoke about his journey, his love for philosophy, and his efforts to inspire his own students the way I had unknowingly inspired him. "I try to show them," he said, stirring his coffee, "that philosophy isn't just about abstract ideas. It's about life, our mistakes, our triumphs, and how we make sense of it all." Hearing this, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride. Roger had transformed the painful chapter of our shared history into something meaningful, something constructive. "I wish I could say I plan to be your role model," I said with a wry smile, "but life had other plans." Roger chuckled softly. "Isn't that the way it always is? We stumble, we learn, and if we're lucky, we find a way to turn it into something good." As we spoke, I realized how much I had changed since the days of my own moral failings. I was no longer the teacher who had let passion and poor judgment cloud her ethics. I had grown into someone who could acknowledge her mistakes, face the consequences, and use those experiences to help others. At one point, Roger reached into his bag and pulled out a worn copy of my book. "Would you sign it for me?" he asked, his voice tinged with both humor and sincerity. I took the book, my hands steady, and wrote a simple message. "To Roger, proof that even in our darkest moments, light can emerge. Thank you for reminding me of that. With gratitude, Amelia." When I handed it back to him, he smiled. "You know," he said, "I think I became a teacher because of you. Not despite everything that happened, but because of it. You showed me that imperfection doesn't disqualify us from making a difference." As we parted ways, I watched him disappear into the city streets, a man who had turned his struggles into wisdom, just as I had. Walking back to my hotel, I reflected on the strange, unexpected ways life weaves connections between people. Roger and I had been each other's catalysts, first for chaos, then for redemption. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a deep sense of peace. My mistakes, my struggles, my efforts to rebuild, they had all led me here, to this moment of understanding and closure. I had found purpose not in perfection but in the messy, beautiful process of learning and teaching, of falling and rising again. And I knew, without a doubt, that Roger had too. A place of mutual respect and profound understanding. As Roger and I spoke late into the evening, it felt as though the weight of years had been lifted. We shared stories of our classrooms, debates about philosophy and ethics, and reflections on how our intertwined pasts had shaped our lives in unexpected ways. When it was time to part, Roger handed me a copy of his first book, a treatise on ethics and education. In the dedication, he had written, "To Professor Amelia, who taught me that our mistakes do not define us, it's how we respond to them that matters. Thank you for the most important lesson of all." That night, back in my hotel room, I sat with the book in my hands, overwhelmed by the journey my life had taken. From the passionate but naive young teacher to a woman who had stumbled painfully, learned deeply, and ultimately rebuilt herself into someone stronger and wiser. I thought of the students whose lives I had touched over the years, the colleagues who had granted me a second chance, and Roger, the catalyst for my fall and my redemption. Our paths had crossed in ways I could never have foreseen, and yet, somehow, they had brought us both to a place of growth and purpose. Staring out the window at the city lights, I thought about the countless stories playing out in each of those illuminated windows, some of triumph, others of failure, most a mixture of both. For the first time in years, I felt a profound peace with my own place in that vast, intricate tapestry of human experience. I had learned that our mistakes, no matter how grave, don't have to mark the end of our story. Instead, they can be the beginning of a new one, if we find the courage to face them and the wisdom to learn from them. As I prepared for bed, a quiet sense of gratitude washed over me. Gratitude for the lessons, the challenges, and the people who had been part of my journey. Gratitude for the chance to transform my scars into tools for teaching, my failures into opportunities for growth. I closed my eyes with a smile on my lips, ready for the next chapter of my life. I didn't know what it would bring, but I no longer feared the unknown. Instead, I embraced it with hope and determination. Because I had learned the most important lesson of all, life isn't about avoiding the fall, it's about how we rise after each stumble. And sometimes, it's the marks left by those falls that become our greatest strengths, shaping us into better versions of ourselves and inspiring others to do the same. As sleep enveloped me, I held on to that thought, comforted by the knowledge that the story wasn't over. My story, our story, would continue to unfold, with its twists and turns, triumphs and setbacks. That's the beauty of life, its endless potential for growth, learning, and rediscovery. And in the quiet moments between, when the world feels still and full of possibility, we find the courage to keep moving forward, teaching, learning, and striving to leave the world just a little better than we found it. So here I stand, sharing my story with you, not as a hero, nor as a villain, but as an imperfect human being who has stumbled, fallen, and risen again. My hope is that in my words, you find echoes of your own journey, something that inspires you to face your challenges with courage and honesty. After all, we are all students in this great school of life, and its most valuable lessons often arise from our most painful mistakes. So I ask you, what is your story? What lessons have you learned, and how will you use those lessons to make the world a better place? Remember, your story is far from over. You hold the pen to write its next chapters. Do so with wisdom, with compassion, and with the understanding that each new day offers a chance to become the best version of yourself. And who knows? Perhaps one day, you'll share your own tale of redemption and growth, inspiring others to take their own brave steps forward. That's how we move ahead, by sharing our stories, learning from one another, and reminding ourselves that no matter how dark the path may seem, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. So keep going. Face your fears. Learn from your mistakes. And never stop growing. Because your story, like mine, is far from finished. The best chapters are still waiting to be written.